Rain swept across Wintergarth like a punishment from the heavens, its cold needles stinging every face that dared linger in the open. Lanterns flickered along the stone path leading to the assembly hall, their trembling light reflecting on puddles that shivered under each passing carriage. Music swelled faintly from within, violins, polished laughter, the refined chatter of a world that guarded its doors fiercely against those who had fallen from grace. Marian Ashford paused beneath the dripping archway, gathering her worn shawl closer around her shoulders. Her gown, though clean and carefully mended, clung miserably to her in the downpour. She glanced behind her. Jonas, thin as a reed despite only 8 years of life, held his little sister's hand with protective firmness. Eleanor's broken wooden doll hung from her arm, one eye missing, its fabric dress darkening with rain. The children were shivering, yet silent. They had learned long ago that silence was safer. "This will take only a moment," Marian whispered, smoothing Jonas's wet hair. "The position was promised. Once secured, everything will change." Jonas nodded, though doubt shadowed his young eyes. He shielded Eleanor with his coat, as if that thin garment could fend off the bitterness of both weather and society. Inside the hall, chandeliers sparkled like constellations, casting gold over gowns of silk and officers' uniforms adorned with polished brass. Laughter swirled through the air like perfume. It was a world Marian once knew only from afar, before debt, illness, and widowhood sealed her fate. A footman halted her at the doorway, his gaze sharp with disdain. "Your invitation, madam?" "I was summoned regarding employment. Mrs. Eldridge." "Ah," he interrupted with a thin smile. "Her ladyship instructed me to escort you." His tone carried the chilling courtesy of a man following unpleasant orders. Marian followed, ignoring the prickling sensation of stairs upon her back. The children remained outside. The footman refused to allow them entry. "They cannot be brought in dripping like street waifs," he said, his sneer soft but cutting. Marian's breath caught. Leaving them outside in such weather was cruel, but she had no choice. She whispered promises to return swiftly, though each step away felt like tearing a piece of herself free. The footman led her toward the ballroom where Mrs. Eldridge, older, kind-faced, should have been waiting. Instead, Marian stopped short. Standing beneath a cascade of candlelight was Lady Verena Blackwell, her gown a shimmering ocean of silver-blue satin. She held a fan delicately, as though anything more common than silk might soil her fingers. Her smile, when she turned toward Marian, was that of a cat preparing to examine a trapped mouse. "Mrs. Ashford," Verena said, voice sweetened with poison. "How courageous of you to appear." Marian curtsied, keeping her voice steady. "I was assured." "Oh, indeed. You were assured many things, I imagine. Promises often comfort the desperate." Marian stiffened. Verena's circle of admirers leaned closer, eager for cruelty dressed as social elegance. "I apologize," Marian said quietly. "I came only to inquire about the governess position. My children are outside, soaking in the rain." Verena's eyes glinted. "Yes, we saw. Pitiful sight." A ripple of laughter stirred the air. Marian felt the sting deep in her chest. Verena tilted her head. "Allow me to clarify. After further consideration, the household has determined that the widow of a disgraced debtor presents a reputational complication. You must understand, children learn from example. What would it teach them to see their governess burdened by such scandal?" Marian felt her breath tremble. "My late husband's misfortunes were not of my making." "No misfortune ever is," Verena replied, tapping her fan against her palm. "Nevertheless, ladies here have standards." A murmur passed through the spectators, agreement dressed in pity. Marian's dignity, thin but fiercely guarded, held her upright. "Then I have wasted your time. I will take my leave." She turned, trembling, and pushed her way past watching faces. Behind her, whispers crescendoed. "Ashford? Was that the family ruined by unpaid debts? They say her husband died owing half the town. She should have stayed hidden. Imagine thinking the Duke would hire someone like her." "The Duke?" Marian flinched. She had not seen him, but his name carried through every room like a cold wind. Duke Aldrich Hawthorne, stern, solitary, and wealthy beyond measure. His estate shadowed the town like a legend carved from stone. If he was present tonight, she dared not meet him. A widow's shame was one thing. A widow catching the gaze of a duke was another entirely. Yet as she hurried toward the exit, a tightening in the air marked his presence before she saw him. A man towering above the crowd, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, elegant in black. His expression carved from marble. The assembly seemed to bend around him, giving space to the gravity he carried effortlessly. His gaze, deep, unreadable, met hers for a single, shattering heartbeat. That instant was not kind, it was not cruel. It was a study, a silent question, a moment of dissonance between his reputation and his humanity. Marian lowered her eyes at once, curtsied without slowing, and escaped into the rain. Outside, the storm had worsened. Jonas wrapped both arms around Eleanor as they huddled beneath the stone archway. Water dripped from their hair and sleeves. Their lips were nearly blue. "Mother," Jonas said, trying to smile. "We're all right." Her heart broke with a quietness that left her breathless. She gathered them close, shielding them with her shawl. "I should not have left you this long." A roll of thunder drowned her words. Eleanor clung to her skirt. Marian swallowed her panic. "Come," she said softly, "we will find shelter elsewhere." But before she could rise, she sensed another presence, steady footsteps approaching through the rain. She looked up. Duke Aldrich Hawthorne stood only a few paces away, his cloak darkened by the storm but his bearing unchanged, as if he alone was untouched by the weather's cruelty. He did not speak immediately. His gaze moved from Marian's drenched form to the children trembling behind her. The lantern above them flickered. Her pulse hammered. He knelt, not fully but just enough for his eyes to meet Jonas's level. A subtle gesture, unexpected from a man of his stature. Jonas froze. Aldrich's voice, when it came, was a low, controlled rumble of thunder tamed to civility. "Is this how Wintergarth greets its most vulnerable?" Marian blinked at him, stunned. No aristocrat had ever spoken to her in such a manner, measured, solemn, neither pitying nor dismissive. "I, your grace," she stammered. "We were leaving." "I can see that," he replied calmly. "But not like this." Lightning flashed. Something in his expression shifted, barely visible yet unmistakable, a tightening of the jaw, a spark of indignation. Then, quiet enough to be almost lost to the storm, he murmured, "Unacceptable." Marian opened her mouth to object, to insist she needed no charity, but the words drowned under a surge of cold wind. Aldrich extended his hand, not toward her, but toward the children. "Come," he said, voice resonant despite the rain. "You should not remain in the cold." Jonas hesitated, glancing at his mother. Marian's breath caught in her throat, torn between fear of judgment and the undeniable warmth behind the Duke's controlled exterior. Before she could answer, Aldrich rose, cloak falling in a dark sweep around him. He looked at Marian, a single weighted glance. "This ends now," he said quietly. And for the first time that night, the rain seemed to fall more softly. Dawn crept over Hawthorne Manor with a pale, uncertain light, the kind that revealed every frost-kissed branch and every whisper of breath rising from the earth. Marian Ashford stood at the threshold of the small cottage the steward had shown her the night before, an unused dwelling on the Duke's land, its hearth cold but its walls sound. She had argued with trembling resolve that she could not possibly accept such accommodations, but the steward, a gray-haired man with a spine as straight as any officer, had replied simply, "His Grace insists." And that had been that. Now, as she stepped outside, the silence of the estate settled around her like a fragile truce. Jonas gathered fallen twigs for a morning fire, while little Eleanor traced patterns in the frost with her finger. Their cheeks were still pink from the previous night's cold. Marian could hardly think of it without flinching. Jonas's blue-lipped bravery, Eleanor's shivers, her own mortification at being turned away as though she were a stain upon society's hem. Yet the Duke's intervention lingered in her mind, an image she could not dislodge. Aldrich Hawthorne standing in the rain, expression carved with an indignation that did not belong to a man known for emotional austerity. Why had he bothered? Why had he interfered at all? A soft crunch drew her from the thought. A parcel lay by the door, small, wrapped neatly in waxed cloth, tied with a dark cord. She gathered it in both hands, surprised by its weight. Inside, she found a pair of sturdy children's boots, newly polished yet simple, the leather supple and warm-lined. Jonas stared, speechless. "Are these for us?" he asked, running his fingers along the stitching. Marian's breath caught. The boots were not grand. They were practical, precisely sized for Jonas's small feet. No nobleman would stoop to select such a thing, unless he meant to fill a need rather than offer charity. "They must be a mistake," she murmured, though the words rang hollow. Jonas's brow furrowed. "But they fit." Indeed they did. Perfectly. Before she could form another thought, the steward approached with a gentle bow. "Madam, Her Grace requests that you and your children feel free to walk the grounds. The Duke prefers his tenants comfortable, not hidden away." Marian stiffened at the implication. We are not tenants, sir. The steward's eyes softened a fraction. Then consider yourselves guests. Yes. The word sat uneasily in her mind. She opened her mouth to question him further, but he had already turned away, leaving her with more uncertainty than reassurance. Throughout the morning, estate workers passing the cottage observed her with curious glances. Some nodded politely, others whispered behind gloved hands. By midday, Marian ventured into the small market in town, children in tow, to purchase flour and candles with the last of her coins. But the moment she entered the bakery, the atmosphere shifted. Two women at the counter abruptly lowered their voices. Did you hear? The Duke has taken in a widow. On his own land? With her children, no less. Scandalous. Marian stiffened. Her cheeks burned, though she kept her eyes fixed on the loaves displayed behind the glass. A third woman leaned closer to the others. Lady Verena claims the widow attempted to charm his grace at the assembly. Impossible, another replied. The Duke despises such theatrics. Well, he clearly does not despise hers. Their laughter was sharp as pins. Marian placed her coins on the counter with trembling dignity. 2 small loaves, please. The baker hesitated, then handed them over with an awkward nod, as though uncertain whether kindness or caution better suited the moment. Marian took the bread, gathered the children, and stepped into the street, the weight of 100 unseen stares pressing down upon her. Later that afternoon, she returned to the cottage only to find another parcel resting on the windowsill, a delicate package wrapped in fine linen. Inside lay a small doll, carefully mended, its missing eye replaced with a painted button, its dress newly stitched from soft fabric. Eleanor gasped, clutching it to her chest with reverent joy. Marian swallowed. The workmanship was meticulous, the fabric too fine to have been found in the hands of a common seamstress. Someone had taken time, real time, to restore the toy for a little girl they did not know. Her heart tightened. She did not need to ask who had done it. The third gift came just as night began to fall. A folded shawl, warm and beautifully woven in a rich burgundy hue. Marian hesitated to touch it, for she owned nothing so fine. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Duke Aldrich Hawthorne himself, tall, imposing, but without the cold austerity that had marked him the night before. His presence filled the modest space with disquieting gravity. I believe this is yours, he said, extending the shawl toward her. Marian's heart jolted. Your Grace, I cannot accept this. It is already accepted, he replied, his voice calm yet unyielding. You are on my land. You will not endure the winter without proper warmth. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the fabric. You owe me nothing. True, he said, brow lifting slightly. And yet I am not accustomed to ignoring what is in front of me. Jonas and Eleanor lingered near the hearth, watching silently. Marian stepped aside, granting the Duke a clearer view. His gaze softened, barely perceptible but undeniable, when it fell on the children. You must not think, Marian said quietly, her voice trembling despite her resolve, that I seek your patronage. Last night was humiliation enough. Aldrich's jaw tightened. Last night was an injustice not of your making. I merely corrected what should never have occurred. Marian's breath caught as a gust of wind swept through the cottage doorway, blowing stray strands of hair across her face. Instinctively, Aldrich reached to brush them away, but halted just before his fingers touched her. The air between them tightened, charged with something neither of them dared acknowledge. His hand lowered slowly. If rumors trouble you, speak them to me. Rumors. The word tasted bitter. I have no right to trouble you with such matters, Marian said. You trouble no one, he replied, voice low. Gossips do. Her pulse quickened. She felt suddenly seen in a way she had not been in years, seen beyond poverty, beyond shame, beyond the weight she'd carried alone. The moment stretched. Then, from the open window, a servant's gasp shattered it. A young maid stood outside, hand to her mouth, clearly having witnessed the near touch. Her eyes widened, her shock unmistakable. Aldrich stepped back at once, his face returning to its familiar impassive mask. The maid fled. And Marian knew, with sinking certainty, that the rumors now had fresh fire. Aldrich exhaled, controlled and taut. It appears my assistance complicates matters more than I intended. Marian bowed her head. For your kindness I am grateful. For the consequences, I am afraid. A shadow crossed his eyes. Fear nothing under my protection. But even as he spoke, distant voices drifted from the estate path, gossip rising like smoke on the breeze. Verena Blackwell's sharp tone carried above the rest. So it is true. The Duke visits her cottage. Marian froze. Aldrich turned toward the voices, his expression darkening with a quiet fury. The scandal had begun. Snow fell over Hawthorne Manor in slow, deliberate spirals, as though winter itself had paused to listen. The storm had begun at dusk, swallowing the horizon and pressing every guest, servant, and passerby toward the estate's glowing windows. Inside, the grand corridors carried the scent of pine wood and candle smoke, muffling the world in a hush that felt both sacred and foreboding. Marian Ashford stepped carefully along the polished floor, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. She had been summoned by Mrs. Eldridge, this time with genuine kindness, to retrieve a basket of provisions left near the main kitchen. It was meant to help her through the storm, the steward had explained. Yet as Marian walked through the vast, dimly lit corridor, she could not shake the feeling that she was trespassing upon ground reserved for those far above her station. The whisper of childish laughter drifted from a nearby chamber. Her heart seized. Jonas and Eleanor had been invited earlier by the housemaid to wait inside while she collected the provisions. She had left them reluctantly, uneasy at imposing upon the Duke's estate yet again. Now curiosity pulled her toward the sound. She stopped at the threshold of the small drawing room, and froze. Jonas sat curled in an armchair by the hearth, his thin legs tucked beneath him, while Eleanor lay half asleep on a cushioned settee, her mended doll clasped securely in her arms. But it was not their presence that stole Marian's breath. It was the Duke. Aldrich Hawthorne sat beside the fire, coat removed, posture relaxed in a way she had never seen. He held a leather-bound book open across his palm, reading aloud in a voice deep and steady, softened around the edges as though shaped for a far gentler world. When he spoke, the flames flickered as if bending toward him. Jonas gazed up at him with rapt attention, nodding at each turn of the page. Eleanor, barely conscious, reacted to the cadence of his voice more than the words themselves, her tiny fingers curling in comfort. Marian pressed a hand to the doorframe. The scene was too intimate, too tender. It struck some bruised place inside her, a place that had not known a man's gentle presence for far too long. Aldrich looked up. His eyes found hers without surprise. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, closing the book with quiet finality, "the storm worsens. I thought it best the children remain here until you returned." She swallowed hard. "Your Grace, I did not mean for them to trouble you." "They have not troubled me," he replied. "In truth, they have done the opposite." Jonas brightened. "He reads better than my old schoolmaster, Mother." Aldrich allowed the faintest hint of amusement to touch his mouth, a rare, fleeting expression. Marian's heart tightened at the sight. "Children," she murmured, steadying her breath, "it is time we returned to the cottage." But neither child protested. They trusted the Duke with a swiftness that unsettled her. Jonas slid off the armchair, though he lingered by Aldrich's side as though reluctant to leave the warmth of his presence. A sudden crack of thunder shook the window panes. Eleanor whimpered, shifting in her sleep. Marian crossed the room, lifting her daughter into her arms. Aldrich rose as well, stepping forward in instinctive offer of assistance, but he halted when Marian's grip tightened protectively. She turned, her voice softer. "You have been too generous, Your Grace. Far more than someone of my circumstances deserves." His gaze hardened, not in anger but in a kind of solemn resolve. "Circumstances do not dictate worth, Mrs. Ashford." The storm rattled the shutters. A candle flickered wildly, sending shadows leaping across the walls. Marian hesitated, unsure whether propriety or gratitude should guide her next words. "You may think kindly of me," she said, drawing a slow breath, "but society does not. Rumors have begun to spread. My presence here, my children's presence, reflects poorly upon you." Aldrich's jaw clenched, as though the mere mention of gossip offended him. "I have endured society's judgment in far harsher forms than whispers. You need not fear for me." "But I do," Marian whispered before she could stop herself. The truth slipped out like a wound reopening. Aldrich's expression shifted, something careful, something listening. He stepped closer, hands clasped behind his back as if restraining an impulse. "Mrs. Ashford, what transpired last night outside the hall? Those children shivering in the cold while you suffered humiliation at the hands of those who should know compassion. It was intolerable." Marian lowered her gaze. "You hardly know us." "That is not entirely true," he replied quietly. "I have known of you for some time." Her breath stilled. "Of me?" He nodded once. "Your husband's debts were widely discussed. Yet I heard, in smaller, quieter corners, of a woman who sold her own belongings to keep her children fed, who refused charity, who carried more dignity in poverty than most display in privilege." Marian closed her eyes, a tremor running through her. No one had ever acknowledged those struggles without mockery or pity. Aldrich continued, voice lowering. When I saw you in that doorway, soaked and trembling yet standing as though your spine were carved from oak, I realized the stories were true. Marian looked away, tears threatening to form. My husband's death was not the scandal people claim. He fell ill while trying to repay what he could. The rest became my burden. Aldrich's expression tightened. And you bore it alone. I had no choice. You should never have had to choose, he answered. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face. In that moment he looked not like a duke, but a man stripped of every barrier, haunted, earnest, unbearably sincere. Marian felt her resolve unravel. She sank onto the edge of the settee, Eleanor asleep against her shoulder. Why do you concern yourself with us, your grace? Why offer shelter? Why gifts? Why kindness when no one else bothers? Aldrich stepped closer, though a careful distance remained between them. Because I know loneliness when I see it. The word struck her like a tremor. His voice lowered. Hawthorne Manor is large, Mrs. Ashford. Larger than any one man should inhabit alone. Wealth does not warm a home, nor does rank fill its silence. Marian raised her gaze. Their eyes met fully, honestly, without shield or mask. Aldrich lifted a gloved hand, slowly, deliberately, toward her cheek. But just before his fingers touched her skin, he stopped. He hovered there, breath measured, restraint tightening every muscle in his arm. The unspoken longing between them pulsed like a living thing. At last, he withdrew his hand, the movement slight but agonizingly deliberate. I will not take advantage of gratitude or vulnerability, he said quietly. But understand this, Mrs. Ashford, your presence here is not a burden. Nor are your children. I will weather whatever gossip may come. Marian's throat tightened. Your Grace. I do not know how to respond. You need not respond at all. His voice was almost a whisper. Only trust that you are safe. Outside, snow thickened, cocooning the manor in silence. Inside, beneath the glow of fire and candlelight, the fragile boundary between duty and desire trembled, dangerously close to breaking. The Hawthorne Winter Ball unfolded beneath a cascade of crystal light, each chandelier shimmering like caged starlight suspended above a sea of silk and polished boots. Violins rose and fell with polished grace, guiding dancers across the marble floor in sweeping arcs that looked effortless only because each step was drilled into them since childhood. This was society at its most polished, its most merciless. And tonight, Marian Ashford walked directly into its jaws. She had come only to retrieve her children, who had been escorted here by the steward after a misunderstanding about the storm's timing. Marian had argued, softly, desperately, that she could not appear in so fine a gathering, not with the rumors hissing through town like wildfire. But the Duke's instructions had been clear. She was to be admitted without question. So here she was, trembling at the edges of the ballroom, her simple gown making her look like a shadow against the brilliance. She felt the stares before she saw them, curious, judgmental, sharpened by envy and scandal. Her pulse thudded painfully. A noble woman whispered behind a fan, "That is the widow, is it not?" Another answered, "The Duke's charity must know no bounds." Marian's throat tightened. She turned slightly, hoping to slip away, but fate, cruel and theatrical, placed Lady Verena Blackwell directly in her path. Verena stood with perfect posture, gown of silver blue sweeping like moonlit waves around her. Tonight, she shone brighter than any chandelier, and aimed every glimmer of that brilliance as a weapon. "My dear Mrs. Ashford," Verena purred, her voice carrying effortlessly across the hush forming around them, "how admirable that you found the courage to attend such an illustrious gathering. One might almost believe you intended to belong here." Marian's fingers clenched at her skirts. "I came only for my children." "Of course," Verena replied, feigning concern. "Though one wonders if such appearances are wise, considering the whispers. Some have begun to question the nature of your arrangement with His Grace." A ripple of murmurs surged. Marian flushed with mortification, but Verena pressed on, savoring every word. "You see, when a widow of diminished reputation is housed on a duke's land, visited by him publicly, and, oh, the doll repaired so delicately, it becomes difficult for society not to assume." She let the implication linger, gleaming and venomous. "Well, you understand." Marian forced herself to stand taller. "No arrangement exists, Lady Verena. His Grace acted only out of compassion." "Compassion," Verena echoed with a soft laugh. "How virtuous, and how very convenient for you." The laughter around them stung like nettles. Marian's breath shook. She sensed tears rising, unwelcome, humiliating, when a sudden shift in the ballroom's atmosphere cut through everything. Silence. It wasn't gradual, it fell like a curtain. Marian turned, and her heart stopped. Duke Aldrich Hawthorne stood at the entrance of the ballroom, tall and severe against the glittering backdrop. But tonight there was nothing cold about him. His gaze swept the room with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to command, though something far fiercer simmered beneath the surface. His eyes found Marian, drenched in shame, cornered by Verina's cruelty, and something in his expression hardened. The crowd parted instinctively as he crossed the ballroom floor, boots striking marble with purpose. Every murmur died beneath the weight of his presence. Verina's confidence faltered for the first time, her fan drooping slightly as Aldrich approached. He stopped beside Marian, turning to face the gathering. His posture was immaculate, his voice steady and clear. "No woman," he said, "who protects her children with the courage I have seen in Mrs. Ashford shall ever stand alone in my presence." Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a glass. Verina's lips parted in shock, her poise cracking like thin ice. Aldrich's gaze swept the room once more, making certain every ear absorbed his words. "Let gossip suffocate on its own falsehoods," he continued. "Mrs. Ashford is under my protection. Any insult to her is an insult to Hawthorne itself." Whispers surged, astonished, scandalized, awed. Marian, trembling, whispered, "Your Grace, why would you expose yourself so?" He turned to her, his eyes softer but no less intense. "Because silence breeds cruelty. And because you deserve better than to be hunted by those who fear their own reflection." Her breath wavered. She wanted to speak, should speak, but emotion clogged her throat. The Duke's protection was not a shield, it was a declaration. Verina recovered enough to step forward, her voice trembling with indignation. "Your Grace, surely you understand what your words imply. Society." "Society," Aldrich interrupted sharply, "is a fragile construct, Lady Verina. It collapses the moment it is confronted with truth." A flush of humiliation burned Verina's cheeks. She turned away, unable to meet his eyes. But Marian's turmoil was only beginning. Overwhelmed, she stepped back. "Your Grace, I must leave." She slipped toward a side corridor, escaping the stares, the heat of whispers, the weight of Aldrich's boldness. She needed air. She needed distance. She could not bear the thought of being the cause of ruin for him. She reached the dim corridor, breath uneven. Footsteps followed, deliberate, unmistakable. Aldrich appeared, the candlelight casting his face in sharp planes of resolve. "Mrs. Ashford," he said softly, "do not flee from me." She turned, tears stinging. "You should not have spoken so publicly. I am no one. I have nothing to offer but scandal." Aldrich stepped closer, his voice low. "You offer integrity, strength, and a heart that has endured more than most men could withstand." The space between them pulsed with unspoken longing. "Your Grace," she whispered, "the world will think." "Let them think," he murmured. "I care not for their assumptions." Her breath trembled as he reached up, his hand hovering just shy of her cheek, a gesture he had denied himself once before. "May I?" The quiet question unraveled the last of her defenses. She nodded barely. His fingertips brushed her cheek, warm, hesitant, reverent. A touch that held no possession, only truth. Marian felt her knees weaken, her pulse warring between fear and surrender. Aldrich's voice dropped, steady as a vow. "You are not a burden, Marian. Nor a charity. Nor a scandal. You are the first honest thing I have encountered in years." She closed her eyes, breath shuddering. When she opened them, the world had changed, not because of his protection but because of his understanding. Outside, the ballroom resumed its music, unaware that the true turning point of the evening occurred not beneath chandeliers, but here in the quiet corridor where a duke and a widow finally allowed their truths to stand unhidden. Yet the moment, for all its tenderness, trembled with danger. For declarations of the heart, especially those forged in defiance of society, often demanded a price. And Marian sensed, with a sudden chill, that the storm was far from over. A pale dawn clung to the horizon as if uncertain whether it should break over Hawthorne Manor. The storm had passed, leaving ice-laced branches and a silence heavy enough to reveal every hidden fear. Marian Ashford moved swiftly through that stillness, her breath fogging in the bitter air. Her shawl, hastily thrown about her shoulders, fluttered as she strode toward the estate gate with a single desperate purpose. She had to leave before the Duke shattered his reputation for her sake. Jonas and Eleanor hurried beside her, bundled as best she could manage. Jonas kept glancing behind them, confusion shadowing his young face. "Mother," he whispered, "why must we go now?" His Grace said you are safe here. Marian tightened her grip on his hand. There are times when kindness becomes a burden no one should bear, Jonas. But he doesn't mind, the boy insisted. He likes us. Marian swallowed hard. His liking does not protect him from the world. Eleanor stumbled in the snow, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Will the Duke be angry we left? Marian hesitated. I pray he never knows. But even as she spoke, dread carved itself into her chest. Aldrich Hawthorne was not a man easily deceived, nor one who allowed those under his protection to vanish without explanation. She quickened her pace. They reached the outer gardens, lanterns still glowing faintly along the frozen path. The gate loomed ahead, a silent promise of escape. She could not remain, not after the declaration he had made in front of all society. He had defended her with words that could not be withdrawn, and she feared the consequences that would rain down upon him. Just a few more steps, she told herself. The crunch of boots behind her shattered the calm. Marian stopped. Jonas nearly collided with her. Eleanor clutched her skirts, trembling. Marian turned slowly. Duke Aldrich Hawthorne stood halfway down the path, his dark coat stark against the snow, breath visible in the cold air. There was no fury in his expression, only something deeper, heavier, and far more dangerous. Mrs. Ashford, he said, his voice echoing across the frost. You were leaving. Marian felt the shame burn her throat. Your Grace. I cannot stay. Last night's events have made it impossible. Aldrich approached with deliberate steps, each one firm yet measured. Impossible? Or frightening? She stiffened. Both. He stopped before her, close enough that the faint warmth of his presence reached her. You believe running spares me? It does, she insisted. Those people will twist your kindness into something unworthy of you. You should not suffer that on my account. Aldrich's jaw tightened, not in anger but frustration at her stubbornness. Marian, I have weathered battles far harsher than rumors. What I cannot weather, what I will not tolerate, is seeing you walk into the cold again. Her eyes stung. If I stay, I ruin you. You elevate me, he said quietly. She shook her head, refusing to let the words touch her. I am only a widow with nothing to offer but trouble. Aldrich's gaze sharpened. Do you believe I seek offerings? That I extend protection because I expect repayment? He stepped closer, voice lowering. You mistake me, Marian. Gravely. Before she could respond, Eleanor's muffled sob cracked the morning stillness. The little girl buried her face against Marian's side. Jonas hovered beside them, torn between fear and hope. Aldrich's face softened as he looked at the children. Jonas, Eleanor, he said gently, why are you trembling so? Jonas hesitated, then stepped forward with trembling bravery. We thought, if Mother leaves, you will not want us any more. Aldrich knelt in the snow. It was slow, deliberate, an act that stunned Marian as much as the children. A duke kneeling before two frightened children in the freezing dawn. Jonas stared wide-eyed. Eleanor peeked from behind her mother's skirts. Aldrich extended his hands, palms up, a gesture of complete openness. You need not fear the cold again, he said softly. Come here, all of you. The words seemed to warm the air itself. Jonas took a hesitant step, then another. Eleanor released Marian's gown and moved toward him, touching his gloved hand with her small mittened one. Aldrich closed his fingers gently around hers, a promise sealed without a single flourish. Marian's breath faltered. The ache she held so tightly within her chest loosened, unraveling into something painful yet liberating. Aldrich rose slowly, lifting Eleanor into his arms with surprising ease. She rested her head against his shoulder as though she had always belonged there. Jonas stood beside him, uncertain but hopeful. Aldrich met Marian's gaze. Tell me, he said softly, do you truly wish to leave? Her voice broke. I only wish to spare you. You spare me by staying. Her heart cracked open, raw and trembling. I am not accustomed to being wanted, Your Grace. He stepped closer, close enough that she felt the warmth of his breath mingle with the cold between them. Then allow me, he murmured, to be the first man who wants you without hesitation, without condition, without fear of the world's opinion. Marian's eyes brimmed. She lifted a trembling hand to her mouth, trying to contain the emotion surging through her. Aldrich reached gently for that hand, his touch careful, as though afraid he might startle her. He brought her fingers to his chest, placing them over his heart. The beat beneath her palm was steady, resolute, impossibly real. This, he whispered, belongs to you if you choose to stay. Marian closed her eyes. Snow drifted around them in soft spirals. The world seemed to hold its breath. I do not know how to be in your world, she whispered. Then we shall build a new one, he replied. Together. Jonas stepped closer to them. Mother, please? Eleanor reached out from Aldrich's arms, tiny fingers brushing Marian's cheek. And Marian Ashford finally allowed herself to breathe. She lowered her forehead against Aldrich's chest, just beneath her own hand. He exhaled a breath of relief, quiet, reverent, and wrapped one arm around her, the other still supporting Eleanor. The dawn brightened behind them, casting long shadows across the snow. But for the first time since widowhood had claimed her life, Marian felt no fear of the light. Only possibility. Only warmth. Only the promise that she and her children would never again face the world alone.